Thank you very much,
And
Mr. Speaker.
just before I do, can I remind members that they're not to have any material above the desks unless they're speaking. I call the Honourable Member Heather Roy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The ACT Party is supporting the second reading of the Taxation Annual Rates and Budget Measures Bill. Just a few comments, I think, about the budget generally. First, I agree with several of the comments that, in fact, the previous speaker made. The Green Speaker about vision and about planning, about growing the economy. But where I differ from him, or we on this side of the House differ from many of those things, is the means in which he would take to get there. The ACT Party has been quite disappointed with many areas of this budget. There is too much tinkering in many areas, we think, rather than real solutions to the problems that this country faces. When we're looking at how we do tackle the current financial situation, the fiscal situation that we find ourselves in, coupled with the additional burden that the Christchurch earthquakes have added to our economy, we need to look at a higher level, and that's where I agree with the Green Speaker about his statements on vision and on planning. We need to consider the state of our economy as it pertains domestically, but also to the international situation. I would compliment the Minister of Finance on his statements today on and his actions towards tackling the deficit, tackling the debt that we face in this nation. It's far too high, and the focus, of course, in this budget, as he has outlined, is on encouraging saving. Those things are all very commendable, but what they need to be coupled with are the actions, the actual things that will make this saving happen, and the tackling of the deficit and the debt in a meaningful way. The ACT Party was particularly disappointed in the way that student loans have just been tinkered with. If the government really wanted to make an impact into the way in which student debt, that more than $12 billion of student debt that is owed to the country now, is going to be tackled, we should have been taking a long, hard look at re-establishing interest rates on those students' loans so that the incentives were in the right place. The other area, and this pertains directly to this bill that we're speaking about, is working for families. What we see, Mr. Speaker, is just a skimming off of the top. Working for families should never, ever have been the middle-class welfare that it became under the previous government for those on higher incomes. And I will give this example, Mr. Speaker. The member from Waimakariri is busy creasing his face and wriggling around in his seat before he stood up. But what he should remember is that people who are capable of earning and supporting their families should be doing it for themselves. And when, in 2004, Working for Families was first established, I, as a backbench MP on $122,000 a year, a backbench MP with 5 children, had I been the sole income earner in my household, would have been eligible for $22 per week of Working for Families. Why on this earth would anyone ever consider it reasonable that a backbench MP could be eligible for welfare? That is nothing more than middle-class welfare and should never, ever have been on the agenda in the first place. And although I would have liked to have seen the National Party, the government, major party in government, have taken a much more responsible look at Working for Families and tackling it in a much more meaningful way, at least they have taken a knife to this area where it is absolutely warranted. And that's why we're supporting this bill. Growing the economy is absolutely imperative. That's the way out of this situation. And I would also compliment the government on these two very thorough regulatory impact statements. And I raise this issue because when the Working for Families was first put forward in 2004 under the previous government, we barely ever saw any sort of regulatory impact statement. They were always in the drafting phase. They were always about to be tabled, but never were. And these regulatory impact statements that we have before us and have been tabled in the House today are very good and outline quite clearly where we should be going. And I'd like to just take the government to task, having just complimented them on some of the things that are written in here and how they should have acted much more strongly to put many of these in place. And I look at the introductory comments and pick out one paragraph and quote it here as the quickest way for the government to improve national saving and reduce economic imbalances would be to improve its own saving position. The identification and development of options quickly narrowed to those most likely to reduce government spending without undermining the primary purpose of KiwiSaver. That's very pertinent, and as we put policies in place, we should remember those things. When I look at the conclusions now for the KiwiSaver changes, I also want to quote just a piece out of the conclusion statements. The proposed measures could also encourage higher private contributions, something that we should be very mindful in this House, and the government is making a bit of a move towards there, but looking to the future we should be acting very strongly in this regard. The comments also noted that education about the continuing importance of individual saving to ensure resources are over and above New Zealand's superannuation and retirement are highly desirable. And that's quite right, that's a benchmark to which we should always be measuring the policy initiatives put in place. When I go to the Working for Families, and I've already noted our concern about that, just that skimming up off the very top level where much more stringent changes could have been made by the government. Again, the conclusion statements on Working for Families say this. Officials consider that the majority of the options identified in this regulatory impact statement, including the preferred option, will generate fiscal savings, broadly protect lower income earners and better target working for families without, and this is the important part, without having significant impacts on incentives to work, on child poverty or income inequality. Again, very good benchmarks, good principles to which all policy should be measured against, and I would compliment the government on putting those forward. There's plenty of detail in the discussion in the House tonight, but I'd like to come back to the point that I made at the start of my speech, Mr. Speaker, and that is we should be looking at things at a very high level before putting detail in place. We're seeing plenty of tinkering in this budget. We're seeing plenty of tinkering in a number of areas when we could be making much harder decisions that will actually tackle debt, tackle the deficits more quickly than they might have been done otherwise. We are moving in the right direction. That's why we're supporting this budget and supporting this bill, but the ACT Party would have liked to have seen much more regard put to actually getting the incentives right in all of these areas so that we could have tackled growing economic growth much more quickly than we will be able to. Thank you.
I call the honourable member to Uraroa Flavel. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, talofa lava, kia tātou katoa tēnei pō. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak at the second reading of the Taxation Annual Rates and Budget Measures. Mr. Speaker, there's been a key word in this budget, responsibility. The Māori Party is conscious of our responsibility to grow a country that takes us all with it by creating a positive future for every citizen in Aotearoa. We must protect our most vulnerable and no one must be left behind. Mr. Speaker, our role in Budget 2011 has been to call for a reasonable budget which takes account of the sharp edges of recession but also invests in our mokopuna. Mr. Speaker, young Māori New Zealanders are particularly critical to the Māori Party. 54% of Māori are under age 25 years of age. We know